Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined today by two excellent guests. Firstly, I'm joined by Director of Momentous Change, Roger Mullen. Roger, how are you today?
I'm just grand, and yourself, Kenny?
I am well. And Linda Fabiani, MSP for the East Kilbride constituency. Linda, how are you today?
All well today, thank you, Kenny.
Excellent. Well, we start as we always do with our coronavirus statistics update. And just to let you know, if you do want to get involved in the conversation here, you can do that by following us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland at 7. That's Scotland AT and the number 7. So do please join us. We will be flashing some of those texts up on the screen as we go through the show. But with our statistics, from the 15th of June, this data includes confirmed cases at UK Government regional testing centres as well as through NHS Scotland labs. So as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 213,527 people in Scotland have been tested. Of those, 195,482 were confirmed negative and 18,045 were positive. This will be an underestimate of the number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all of those with symptoms will necessarily be tested. And of the people who have tested positive, there were 567 people in hospital last night, 11 of whom were in intensive care, and there were 8 more people in intensive care with suspected COVID-19. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection has sadly risen to 2,453, and this number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 41,969 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have now sadly died from their illness, an increase of 233, and that number does refer to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And as it's Tuesday, we have the Office for National Statistics report, and this week the number of deaths registered in England and Wales for the week ending the 5th of June 2020, which is week 23 of the year, was 10,709. This was 885 higher than week 22 and 7.3% higher than the 5-year average. That increase is likely due to the late May bank holiday, which occurred in week 22 and probably caused a delay in the reporting of some deaths. Of the deaths registered in week 23, 1,588 mentioned the novel coronavirus, the lowest number of deaths involving COVID-19 in the last 9 weeks, and it accounts for 14.8% of all deaths. That's 234 deaths fewer than in week 22. Up to the 5th of June, the total excess mortality since the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak in England and Wales had reached 53,848. In week 23, the proportion of deaths occurring in care homes decreased to 22.6%, while deaths involving COVID-19 as a percentage of all deaths in care homes decreased to 23.4%. And of all deaths involving COVID-19 in England and Wales registered up to week 23, 63.7% occurred in hospital, 29.6% occurred in care homes, 4.5% were in private homes and 1.4% were in hospices. But our first big news story of the day, Boris Johnson announced today that the Department for International Development would be merged into the Foreign Office, asserting that the combined department would better promote British interests. Johnson said it was removing a false divide between two overlapping departments and would allow for spending in line with foreign policy aims. The new ministry will be called the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and will launch in September. And commenting on the UK government's decision, the Scottish Minister for Europe and International Development, Jenny Gilruth, said, "This is a deplorable decision by the UK government, which risks putting UK foreign policy, commercial and political objectives ahead of supporting the world's poorest and most vulnerable communities in a time of crisis. The Scottish government is clear. International development is about reducing global poverty, and we are fully committed to playing our part in tackling shared global challenges, including poverty, injustice and inequality. We urge the UK government to reverse its decision, to protect the jobs at DFID in Scotland, and to ensure that UK aid is free from political influence." And Linda, if I could come to you first on this.
Yeah.
I mean, a number of people surely will be asking, well, why shouldn't aid be part of our foreign policy goals? Why shouldn't we be able to direct money to the countries we like and not to the countries we don't?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, my main concern, other than potential job losses in East Kilbride, which I hope we touch on, this is a huge issue for us. But I worry about the phrase foreign policy aims, because if you're saying that you will only help people across the world if it ties in with your own politics, and who knows what the politics of a UK government are going to be. We've had some really bad foreign policy decisions in the past. I find that terribly worrying, because the criteria for international aid, international development, whatever you want to call it, has got to be combating poverty, emergency aid, of course, what they do about emergency aid for all sorts of terrible disasters that happen in the world. But it's about bringing people out of poverty and helping them to have the structures in their own country that allows them to have a good life and to be looking after themselves. That doesn't necessarily always tie in with the foreign policy of any given government. So I think this is hugely concerning. And yes, international aid should be taken out of the foreign policy and the politics of the country that's donating. It should be something that is done for the good of the people that you are helping. And that's why, I really like the way that the Scottish Government does our own international development, separate from that which we contribute to the UK, which is looking at the organisations, the structures in the country that the aid is going to, that are best placed to be helping their own people and building them up and giving them capacity. And that's the way it should be done. Certainly should not be involved in domestic politics.
Sure. And Roger, just this comes relatively soon after the International Trade Department was spun out of the Foreign Office. What do you think is behind this decision that says that international trade can't be part of the Foreign Office and it shouldn't necessarily be committed to foreign policy goals, but that the aid that we send should be?
Well, I think, first of all, they want to disengage trade from things where you have to make value judgments. So that, for example, if they can negotiate deals with Donald Trump, regardless of what's happening over there, then that's something clearly I think they would want to do, and not get it entwined with a foreign policy where they think there is a larger scope of making value judgments about humanitarian issues and the like. I too, like Linda, am particularly concerned today, however, about the move with DFID. I chair a humanitarian organisation out of London that's concerned about people who are the victims of violence. One of the things that I haven't seen commented on, but I expect this government to do, is not just to dilute the amount of money that goes towards humanitarian issues and poverty alleviation. It will not surprise me at all if they find ways of manoeuvring some of that money into defence issues and to shoring up military capability. That has already been discussed in Parliament, even in my time behind the scenes, with people who want to reclassify activities that would fall within that. So I'm very concerned about what's going to happen to the way in which budgets are going to be managed. And so to that extent, I agree with Linda. I'm particularly concerned about the lack of focus on what I would call wider humanitarian issues.
Mm-hmm. And Linda, you did mention these jobs that may be at stake.
Yeah.
Ian Blackford spoke about this in response to the statement in the House of Commons today. Have you? There are something like 600 jobs at the DFID site in East Kilbride. Have you heard anything about what might happen to those jobs under this new arrangement?
Well, this has been going on for years, actually. Way back, I look back, Riley, at 2014 and our independence referendum, and what was put out by the UK government then and the Better Together campaign was, what will happen? All these jobs in East Kilbride that are part of the UK government will disappear. DFID will close. It will be terrible. And it wasn't long after the referendum that jobs started to be cut in DFID. And then, wind on a few years and HMRC, UK government-controlled jobs are suddenly from Centre 1 being moved out of East Kilbride and centralised. And then when this talk first came about, just prior to the last general election, December last year, the talk started to come about the potential of merging the Foreign Office with International Development Office, and International Trade Office was taken out. And I wrote to the Secretary of State for Scotland at that point and said, I hope that you're going to be protecting these jobs in Scotland, and you're already, taking away skilled jobs from East Kilbride and HMRC. The level of expertise that sits in DFID in these 600 jobs is massive. Mm-hmm. Surely you're going to protect these. It came back with a letter saying, the UK government's going to put more UK jobs into Scotland rather than take them away. There's no word of this happening yet. And here we are. You can't trust a thing they say. The one thing he didn't do, that I asked him to do, was to give a commitment that he would fight to keep these jobs in East Kilbride. Now, when he was challenged today by Ian Blackford, and I didn't see it, but I understand that the PM said that DFID would remain in East Kilbride. What I want to know is in what form. Mm-hmm. In what form will DFID remain in East Kilbride? Are you talking about a wee branch office, the Foreign Office, where jobs will be cut there? I want to know more detail. So I'll be writing back to the Secretary of State for Scotland, asking him again to make that commitment and asking him to explain where all these extra UK government jobs are that he said are coming to Scotland.
Mm-hmm. And Roger, just on that note, we, as Linda said, the Better Together campaign made a lot of promises about these UK civil service jobs that are based in Scotland. But again, as Linda said, especially the HMRC jobs have been stripped back. We may now be about to see the same thing happening with DFID. Do you think this is a political choice that the UK government is making, basically trying to make sure that it doesn't have too many assets left in Scotland should there be another independence vote?
I'm not sure if that is precisely their main motive, although they'll probably be quite happy if it's an effect that's created. I do think, my understanding is that Johnson said the classic phrase, this is a way of getting better value for money for the taxpayer. Mm. But we know what that actually means. That means we're doing something where we can cut. And I am absolutely sure they have already drawn up plans where there's going to be cuts of some type. And although we are rightly concerned about the 600 jobs that Linda is rightly fighting for in East Kilbride, remember too, there are other people in other parts of Scotland who are doing work internationally for DFID. These are people who might be in public sector organisations such as colleges or universities that might have some contracts with DFID money in different parts, for example, of Africa. It could be people like myself who are brought in by agencies to assist in capacity building work. So although it's more difficult to quantify, there's likely to be an effect on work beyond the offices of DFID themselves. And that's something which I think would be deeply concerning, particularly for a country like Scotland, where so many of our citizens want us to be outward looking and engaged in the world, rather than this, which is a move, I think, to disengage.
Mm. Yeah, well, we will obviously keep track of this story as it develops, certainly with regard to the jobs in East Kilbride. We'll want to keep a very close eye on that. But speaking of jobs, between February and April 2020, Scotland's employment rate estimate fell over the quarter to 74.3%, and the unemployment rate estimate rose over the quarter to 4.6%, according to new figures from the Office for National Statistics. These are the first labour market statistics to include a full month of lockdown measures and demonstrate some of the scale of the challenge facing Scotland as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Commenting on the figures, Business, Fair Work and Skills Minister Jamie Hepburn said, "I know that many people will be feeling a deep sense of anxiety about their livelihoods. Keeping people in work while supporting those who have lost their jobs will continue to be at the heart of our thinking as we carefully reopen the economy." Scotland's labour market has changed drastically since the lockdown measures were imposed. As such, we will be convening a labour market summit tomorrow with Deputy First Minister John Swinney, Economy Secretary Fiona Hislop, Further Education Minister Richard Lochhead and I, leading discussions with Skills Development Scotland and the Scottish Funding Council to ensure a coordinated approach to tackling unemployment, giving people skills for the jobs that will be needed as we emerge from the crisis. And Linda, obviously a lot of people have suffered a lot economically as a result of this crisis. What's your feeling about where we are as we start to look at coming out of the crisis? Is there enough coming out of the Scottish Government that you feel confident we can recover relatively quickly?
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm confident that the Scottish Government will do absolutely everything they possibly can within the limitations that they have. I think there's more trouble coming down the line for the economy in the UK generally, and for the economy in Scotland. And when you add to that what we're heading for with Brexit, that's an additional pressure that's going on there. I do think that there's a couple of companies that I think are, I'll just say it. I think they're perhaps taking advantage of the current situation to shift staff. I mean, I would quote BA, for example, in the way that they're dealing with their staff just now, and this has quite an effect on jobs at Glasgow Airport, for example, particularly in domestic flights. They've been trying for ages and ages to shift some staff, give them new contracts, take away their rights. That's been going on for years. And here we are again. They're using, not to say they're not having a problem through the COVID crisis. Of course they are. The aviation industry is. But they're a bit quick to be jumping on and saying they have to cut here, cut there and cut everywhere. Mm-hmm. I would also quote Rolls-Royce in Shannon. I mean, East Kilbride lost a lot of jobs when Rolls-Royce left East Kilbride, and a lot of people in East Kilbride went to Shannon feeling at least they had work to go to. And here we are with Rolls-Royce now want to cut an awful lot of jobs, I would say prematurely. So I think there are issues. And then on the other side of that, you've got an awful lot of small businesses that have found this really, really hard and are, either going to go out of business or they're going to have to, to lose staff. Mm-hmm. So there's a huge maelstrom of issues going on. I think as we move towards what's increasingly looking like a hard Brexit, that's going to get worse with all that uncertainty. As far as the unemployment figures are concerned, it's early days yet. I mean, it is worrying what we heard today, but it is a very small time that has been taken account of there. And as that goes on, we'll start to see a bigger picture. I would like the Scottish Government to have a lot more powers, like was discussed today in Parliament, in terms of the ability to be able to help more. Because we're very structured just now in terms of, for example, the borrowing that we're able to do. And the fiscal framework that was set up at the time is clearly not adequate with what we're all faced with just now, which is a pandemic that's causing all sorts of unforeseen difficulties. I think there has to be a serious look by the UK government at how they can best help Scotland. I'm pretty sure Wales will be in the same position in Northern Ireland, and start talking seriously about how we can bring the four nations through this crisis. I think it's the only way forward.
Yeah. And Roger, as Linda mentioned, we've seen companies like British Airways talking about making everyone redundant and then rehiring them on different terms. Gavin Newlands is pressing this bill to stop that. We're also hearing a lot of people talking about just the general shape of the economy just now, and how we might rebuild in a better way after the pandemic subsides. Do you think there is scope for real changes to be made in how the economy is organised and perhaps how the labour market operates as we move forward?
Well, in one sense, I think this hit is so bad in the economy, and more bad news to come. And because of the nature of it, this is, I think I said the last time I was on the programme with you, Kenny, this is not a typical demand side problem recession. This is a supply side. The government has chosen, for understandable reasons, to close down all sections of the economy. And that is going to have a profound effect. It's going to be a much deeper recession than happened post-2008. There's going to be a considerable problem to try and stimulate effective investment in the future. And there is, of course, a need to readjust, because there is not going to be a quick bounce back, and it's not going to be creating the same type of economy we had in the past. So they almost don't have any choice. Things have to change. And there are ways in which we can look purposefully at trying to shape things in the future. For example, I was listening to a podcast the other day by a friend of mine from Hong Kong, and he was talking about the way in which China, for example, during this pandemic, has increased by a factor of more than 5 the amount of manufacturing and exporting of PPE equipment it has been undertaking globally. And so that would be one small example, but something I think everybody could relate to is the manufacture of these types of goods that are going to be on continuing demand into the future, because people won't want their societies to be as underprepared as we have been this time around. So there's shaping of the economy in different ways. I agree and support very much what Gavin is doing in terms of the labour market. My biggest concern about the labour market is the effect this crisis is going to have on young people. We know that after the financial crisis of 2008, that the sector of the labour market that was particularly affected was young people. There was a collapse in some sectors in apprenticeships. There was the lack of hiring. There was the compression of wages, particularly for people under the age of 25 and the like. We're going to see this writ large unless we do something again. So I'm particularly concerned about age inequalities that are going to be extended unless there is effective action undertaken. And one of the areas that, as I said earlier, I'm most concerned about is how do you intervene in a purposeful way to stimulate investment? Because I think investment is where there is a major headache coming down for the whole of the UK, and indeed for a lot of countries throughout the world.
Well, we move on now to an economic story, but a £230 million return to work package has been unveiled to help stimulate Scotland's economy following the coronavirus pandemic. The initiative covers construction, low carbon projects, digitisation and business support, and will provide a flow of work for businesses and support jobs. It is funded by the reallocation of underspends from schemes interrupted by the COVID-19 outbreak. New projects featured in the package include £51 million for business support, including boosting high-growth companies, £78 million for construction, including £40 million for regeneration projects and £20 million for roads maintenance, £66 million to kickstart our green recovery, including £7 million to equip buses for physical distancing and the return to work, and £35.5 million for digitisation, including justice and education services. Finance Secretary Kate Forbes announced the package today as she opened a Scottish Parliament debate on the financial implications of COVID-19. She also sought Parliament's support for the Scottish Government's call to be granted additional financial powers to manage the crisis. And Linda, this is part of what you were talking about, this potential for the Scottish Government to get expanded powers. Could you tell us a bit about what the restrictions are just now and what the Scottish Government is looking for?
Well, at the moment, for example, the Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government can borrow for capital projects, but they can't borrow, to be able to, in revenue, to be able to see themselves over the peaks and troughs that happen when you have unforeseen circumstances like you do now. And that's a problem. So this package that's been put together today, there's some good stuff in there. I mean, I'm particularly pleased about the construction industry boost because, I think that ticks a lot of boxes in terms of getting people to work and an end product. The digitisation stuff is necessary because of the new way of working. We're going to have a lot of things.
Yeah.
Starting the green economy is really important because that is a thing for the future. But actually, when you look at the scale of what we're facing, it's not an awful lot of money. So we have to be like a normal country. The UK is borrowing hugely at the moment to get them through this crisis. We're relying on consequentials that go on top of the block grant, and some of which have been promised and then withdrawn, by the way, which is another big issue.
Yeah.
So it's not a good situation to be in. And I actually think that our economy has very particular parts of it that only the Scottish Government and indeed the Scottish Parliament are able to really see what's required and to be able to be fleet of foot to plug the gaps and help us get on.
Yeah.
I think it's so important. So the limitations are there. There was always limitations. When the fiscal framework was set after the Smith Commission, it was as good as we could get. But it certainly wasn't what we wanted. And we've heard evidence recently. Philip Rycroft, was that the chap's name, that talked about the economy going forward in terms of Brexit, and saying the package that was put together was perhaps suitable at the time, but facing what we're facing now, it's certainly not suitable. So if the UK's budget and forecasts are not good enough for going forward through this pandemic, it stands to reason that the powers that the Scottish Parliament has are not good enough either and have to be rethought.
Well, we move on. You were speaking about Brexit there, and Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove today told the House of Commons there was still time to bring home a deal with the EU, but stressed that the UK government would not seek an extension to the transition period and did not wish to continue negotiating past the autumn. Opposition parties expressed doubt about this, though, with Gove's Labour shadow, Rachel Reeves, pointing to other Tory manifesto commitments around zero tariffs and border arrangements as a sign that the government was still not being honest about what was achievable. The SNP's Pete Wishart MP said the Tory government's refusal to heed the dire economic warnings and seek an extension to the Brexit transition period to protect the economy, jobs and people's livelihoods is a reminder of its reckless plans to put ideology ahead of reality. The Tories are dragging Scotland headfirst towards a Brexit disaster, threatening our economy with the growing risk of a devastating bad deal or a catastrophic no-deal outcome. Rather than working constructively with the devolved governments, the Prime Minister has instead shown complete contempt, sidelining their interests and tearing up any pretence of a partnership of equals. And Roger, this is a story that has been rumbling on for some time. We're now just a couple of weeks from the deadline to arrange any extension to the transition period. Clearly, the UK government is not planning on any extension. Do you think they're likely to bring home a deal, as Michael Gove said, before the end of the year?
I don't think there is any prospect whatsoever of them bringing a deal that would be described in any way as good. They might be able to paper over a few cracks, but it's going to have a profound effect on the economy. And on top of the consequences of the pandemic, this is going to be another major problem. And, if I reflect back to in your previous question to Linda about the powers of the Scottish Parliament, I don't think we're going to be able to tackle this combination of challenges we face effectively with some more powers to the Scottish Parliament, even though I would welcome them. I mean, we are now getting into a situation where it is of great urgency, if we want to adequately address our future, that we move as quickly as possible towards addressing the issue of independence. Only through getting the full powers of independence are we going to be able to reform our own society to cope for this future we are going into. It is, of course, partly, do you have the powers to borrow money? Do you have the means through getting past Brexit to trade with other countries? But it's more than that. It's how are we going to reshape our economy and society to make it fit for the future? we need to be able, in my view, to completely reform the entire tax system that people are operating under. This tax system we work with is very complicated and it's not fit for the modern era. And so, for me, the Brexit question is fundamental in this regard. It's fundamental politically in that we're being forced into a choice not of the Scottish people's making. Mm-hmm. And so, from a democratic reason, we have to get the powers to try and address that. But fundamentally, if we're going to address the kind of huge economic challenges we have, we're going to need to move, in my view, faster towards attempting to secure independence.
Mm-hmm. And Linda, assuming that we don't achieve independence before the end of this year, do you think there's any chance of the EU bodies and the EU member states perhaps offering Scotland some kind of support to help us bridge the gap until such times as there is perhaps a vote on independence? Well,
I would like to believe that we have enough friends in the European Union that would be possible. And I'm pretty confident that our ministers are having these discussions ongoing with other members of with the members of the EU. I think we do have friends in Europe. I think that some of the comments that are coming out from various people on this would suggest that many of them would not be averse to that discussion. And I hope we can have it. Because, well, Scotland is independent. The Brexit vote showed that most Scots want to be allied to the European Union. We see ourselves as European, outward looking, as Roger said. Mm-hmm. So our friends in the European Union know that, and I think would be welcomed. I think they want to help us along that path. So, yes, I'm confident that these discussions are ongoing. Yes, I think there are possibilities and that we should keep pushing for them.
Well, we will keep our eyes open for that. But the SNP has tabled a series of amendments to the UK trade bill, which would protect Scotland's producers and remove the threat of a free fall in food standards in post-Brexit trade deals. The UK trade bill makes provision for post-Brexit trade deals, and the Tory government has, so far, failed to set out the role for Holyrood or other devolved parliaments. Amendments laid by the SNP would give those devolved administrations the right to reject trade deals and would protect standards on imported goods. Deirdre Brock MP, the SNP's shadow DEFRA secretary, has demanded action from the UK government since the Brexit referendum to ensure that Scotland's high-quality food producers would not be undercut by cheaper substandard imports. And Linda, if I could come back to you on this has been a real kind of sticking point ever since the Brexit vote happened. The lack of consultation with the devolved administrations. Yeah. Do you think there's any chance of these amendments getting into the trade bill so that Holyrood does have a formal role?
The answer is I don't know, but I suspect not. I mean, I'm not at Westminster and I'm not able to keep up with the ongoing discussions. I just hear from my colleagues down there what's happening. And they don't seem to give a toss about the provenance of Scotland's absolutely amazing food and drink industry and products. So I'm not convinced that they care at all. I think the contempt that this UK government has shown the devolved administrations on so many things is very, very telling. They will carry on regardless, as far as I can see, to what they think, not even what is the best for the UK or even the best for their own country. Whether it be England, Tories in Scotland, Wales, or whatever. But to me, it's about the best for particular people. That little elite class of society that seems to be more and more running things these days. Whether they come from business, politics, media, financial services, whatever, it's all in their interests. And I think that's what's driving it. And it's becoming more and more apparent to me in everything they do. I've gone away off onto a different subject there, Kenny. I'm sorry, but I'm finding it really, really sickening the way they're behaving in every aspect of our life.
Well, these issues do all tie together. But we move now to a look at the other side of the world. And New Zealand has lost its COVID-free status today after two women who had been given permission to leave quarantine early after arriving after arriving from the UK tested positive for the coronavirus. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said the government would review what happened, but that it was clear checks were not adequate in this case. Vigorous testing is now taking place across those who were in the quarantine facility at the same time and those who may have had any, even the remotest chance of contact with the women, Ardern said in a Facebook Live post. Last week, New Zealand had become one of the first countries in the world to eliminate COVID-19 and return to pre-pandemic normality, lifting all social and economic restrictions except its border controls. The country requires all people arriving from abroad to quarantine for 14 days to avoid reintroducing the disease. The two women, aged in their 30s and 40s, had travelled from the UK to visit a dying parent in Wellington on June 7th, the Director General of Health said in a news conference. Both had gone into quarantine in Auckland after landing, but had been given special permission to leave on compassionate grounds, even though one had symptoms which she attributed to a pre-existing condition. They tested positive after they returned to quarantine. The new cases ended a 24-day streak of no new infections in the country. And Roger, this just goes to show how vital it is to have control over your own borders and the ability to quarantine new arrivals if you're going to have any hope of completely suppressing the disease, doesn't
it? Absolutely. And, when you look at things in a global sense, you get a very different picture to the picture we're getting if you just look at it in a European sense. In Europe, we're seeing a decline in infections because of the state we're at in the curve and because of different measures. Globally, however, coronavirus is increasing. It is growing in many parts of the world. And as it grows and grows in different parts of the world, it means all the world becomes more susceptible because of travel and other forms of engagement. So, New Zealand has been an absolute outstanding star in the way in which they have been able to manage things for the benefit of their own people by taking very strong, amongst other things, very strong border action a long time ago from the outset. And of course, he's an example of powers that would reside in an independent country, but of course Scotland does not have any powers over those matters at the moment. So that policy arm was not in the hands of the Scottish government. And so there are major challenges. When people talk of coming out of this pandemic, it worries me because I don't think we're coming out of it now. What we are seeing is a change because of where we're at in the curve. But recent research in the last few days announced from, for example, Washington University indicates very strongly that there's seasonality should be expected with this virus. In other words, it is going to come back in those societies that think at the moment they're coming out of it. Now, how are we going to manage that? I think we've learned a lot. I hope we've learned a lot. And I think things would be managed differently in the future. But nonetheless, it's still going to be a major challenge. It's very good, if we go back to raising the issue of New Zealand, that it's a small number of cases because they have got the means to focus very strongly and to tie that down and to make sure it does not create wider infection. But for a lot of countries, such transmission through international travel would be of much greater concern.
Well, we stay with international news, and the European Union today voiced grave concerns about US President Donald Trump's June 11th decision to authorise sanctions against the International Criminal Court, saying that any punitive measures were unacceptable and unprecedented. The EU, whose trade and security ties are closely intertwined with the US, also said the move showed how the rules-based international order is facing increased pressure, an allusion to Trump's withdrawal from several other treaties and accords. Trump has authorised US economic and travel sanctions against employees of the Hague-based ICC involved in an investigation into whether American forces committed war crimes in Afghanistan. The European Union expresses grave concern about the announced measures and reconfirms its unwavering support for the International Criminal Court, the EU said in a statement, urging the United States to reverse its position. Sanctions against those involved in the work of the ICC staff and their families, as well as persons associated with the ICC, are unacceptable and unprecedented in scope and in content. Linda, this is unprecedented, as the EU have said there. How should the world be reacting when the supposed leader of the free world is acting like this?
Oh my, I just despair at everything that man does. I also despair about the fact that the UK government, are dealing with this administration in America in a way as if they are going to be something wonderful for us when we end up, with a hard Brexit and trying to do all sorts of deals with a man and an administration which seem to me to be completely untrustworthy in every way, if not, it's an unstable administration. In fact, might even be an unstable president, but there you go. So I'm absolutely horrified by it. I think, as well as the EU making this statement, I would like to see every individual nation state within the EU making a separate statement on it to make it very strong. I would like to see the UK doing that too. And in fact, I would like to see as many different nations as possible saying very, very firmly how they feel about this. Because it is about all the institutions that have given us a degree of stability in the world in so many ways that this man is attacking. And his behaviour is just outrageous. I have to say, though, I'm even more angry at the people around about him, Kenny, because I can't understand why these people can stand there and watch this man behaving that way and not do something about it. These people are complicit in everything that has been happening all around him in his administration and those who help him. The time has surely come for them to stand up collectively and say enough is enough. Because this man is a real danger to the world.
And Roger, this is a recent move from Trump, but as we said, he's withdrawn from several other international agreements, like the Iran nuclear deal, the Paris Accords on climate change. And at the same time, we're seeing here in Britain this desperation to escape from things like the European Court of Human Rights. What does it do to the international kind of accountability of countries when two prominent Western countries like the US and UK are stepping away from these international bodies?
Well, it holds out the possibility that it's going to destroy much of the international codes of conduct that we've been living with for generations, really. I mean, for example, you raise the issue of the International Criminal Court. There are sanctions that the US are placing against individual judges. Can you imagine the interference in the so-called independence of the judiciary to the extent that a political leader will sanction individual judges because of their, as he would perceive it, actions against his interests? I mean, it is a very dangerous situation that we're in. And I mean, you mentioned quite a number of the issues. I would add to it the move by Trump to stop funding the World Health Organization in the midst of a pandemic. So I'm very concerned about the effect this is going to have in the international order in the longer run, unless it can be reversed. I mean, I support what Linda has said about countries need to speak up about this. But of course, the problem is speaking up is only effective if the person receiving the message is willing to listen. And my concern is Trump shows no interest whatsoever in willing to listen. And indeed, almost worse than that, he adopts a kind of style of bravado. Look at me, I can see down, I can face down all these other people because I lead the most powerful country in the world. So it's I don't know what the solution is in the short run, but it's a very concerning situation for the international order in the longer run.
Yeah. Well, one to watch at least until the election in November. But we move on now back to Scotland, where new figures show that the Scottish Government just missed its carbon emissions reduction targets for 2018. Emissions of 41.6 million tonnes in 2018 were a 45.4% reduction from the baseline 1990 level, although there was a 1.5% rise in emissions between 2017 and 2018. By the Committee for Climate Change's recommended measure of what it calls the GHG account, emissions during the period fell by 50% against a target of 54%, meaning the target was missed by a margin of 4%. And commenting, Scottish Green Environment spokesperson Mark Ruskell said, "This is what happens when politicians congratulate themselves over targets but won't commit to serious action to meet them. This is a climate emergency, and instead of cutting emissions, Scotland continues to hurtle towards climate breakdown. The sharp rise in energy is partly due to the closure of Hunterston Nuclear Power Station being replaced by fossil fuels. This shows why we can't rely on expensive and unreliable nuclear power and a new generation of gas power stations. Instead, we need a step change in investment in Scotland's renewable energy generation, storage and grid infrastructure to meet our targets and create green jobs." So, Linda, this obviously it's not a massively missed target, but these stiff targets that the SNP or the Scottish Government has set itself really need to be met if we're going to get where we need to get on climate change, aren't they?
Yeah. They are very ambitious targets. They're deliberately ambitious. They're hard to meet. Of course they are. There's always that difficulty, balancing the ongoing economy against the aspirations. And then you have the added difficulty of things like carbon capture projects being stopped by the UK government. You have the problem of, the grants on solar power and stuff being stopped and tariffs being changed. So there are issues. I think we probably can do more. Big, hard decisions to be taken. Pretty sure our government recognises this and wants to go forward with it. But it's interesting too about the nuclear power issue. I mean, we're totally opposed to nuclear. Of course we are. But there are, and I'm not an expert in any of this, but there are those that are saying that's a very clean way of providing energy. So, that's another difficult thing that has to be dealt with. Yes, we have to do better. Yes, we shall. And back to an earlier discussion, if we're really serious about a different kind of economy, a different kind of society as well, when we come through this pandemic and building towards that, that's something that can be taken on board here too. So, it's hard to know what words to use, but perhaps when we get through this, we should be looking at opportunities to make things better and grasping these opportunities. And the green agenda has got to be the biggest.
Yeah. And Roger, what do you make of this? Do you think the Scottish Government is on the right track? Do you think these targets are stiff enough? Do you think there's other things that need to be done quickly to get us back on the right track?
I think it's back to a point I made earlier. Unless we get the powers of independence, we're not going to be able to do as much as we want to do. I mean, Linda gave a very good example of the carbon capture. There was a huge project a few years ago that was all set to go off Peterhead. And I was a member of Parliament at the time, and I remember when the UK government pulled the plug on this at short notice. It's not the only thing they pulled the plug on. And so what you've got is you've got a situation where to do the things that we would want to do in Scotland, we cannot act because we don't have the powers of independence to shape fully things like our energy policy. What are we going to do with carbon capture? How much are we going to raise in terms of investment into renewables and the like? So I think there's a lot more needs doing. I think people realise a lot more needs doing. But it's very difficult to do that if you don't have the powers, not only not having all the powers you need, but having people who do have additional powers doing the reverse of what you want them to do. So that where we would want them to invest in carbon capture, they have chosen to use the powers that we don't have to deny that investment. So I think it comes back to there is a fundamental issue here of getting all the powers that are necessary to make the kind of decisions that we want. I think, to be honest, it's going to be very difficult in the longer run to meet the long-term targets unless we get independence.
So obviously we're not likely to get an independence referendum while we're still under lockdown measures. How quickly do you think independence can be back on the table? When would you like to see us having another referendum?
Are you asking me that question?
Yes, Roger. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I would like to see it as soon as it is possible to get free of this challenge to the extent that it would not compromise a referendum. I think it would be really raise fundamental questions if recognizing the challenges that we face, recognizing that we need the powers of independence, and not making sufficiently speedy moves towards trying to secure that. So I don't have a date in mind, but I certainly would want to see a strategy more clearly in place as to how we're going to move towards that.
Yeah, and Linda, same question to you. We've seen the polls have turned somewhat. People want another referendum. They want the chance to rejoin the EU. They increasingly seem to want independence. What's your feeling about when that's going to be on the agenda again?
Oh, I think we have to keep having the discussion, and I think we have to up the discussion. I mean, certainly in the middle of this pandemic it's a very difficult call to make. But I certainly don't think the conversation should stop. We should keep on pushing for it. We should keep on pointing out how things would be better with independence, because we could make our own decisions and have the powers to really affect Scotland in the way we want it to be. So we've got to keep on having that. And certainly, I mean, don't forget, we're heading for an election next year. It's not that far away now. So I think that's got to be a major plank of the forthcoming Scottish Parliament election.
Well, just stay tuned to Broadcasting Scotland. Independence will always be a part of the conversation here. And just finally today, children eligible for free school meals will be among those who continue to be supported over the summer through a package of £27.6 million of additional funding from the Scottish Government. The funding will ensure councils are able to continue the provision of free school meals during the summer holidays and other food provision to help low-income families during the coronavirus pandemic. The latest data from local authorities shows that around 175,000 children and young people are currently receiving free school meals, or vouchers or cash payments to buy meals. The number of children receiving free school food has risen by 53,000 since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, due to the impact of the pandemic on family incomes and financial circumstances. The extra funding will also enable councils to continue to support a range of people who may be facing new or continuing barriers to accessing food, including due to reduced income caused if they're asked to self-isolate through contact tracing up until the end of September. This funding is in addition to the overall package of £30 million allocated to councils in March to provide free school meals and offer food provision to key groups during lockdown. And Linda, given the stooshy there's been about free school meals down south, this is welcome news from the Scottish Government today, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's the right thing to do. I was never in doubt that this would be the case. Because, one of the major things going forward, through this pandemic has been food. Making sure that whether it's people that are shielding, whether it's people that are vulnerable, and whether it's the Scottish Welfare Fund being upped, there has all food security, to use that phrase, through this has been so important. So I was never in any doubt that this was going to be the case, and that's the announcement now made.
Yeah. And Roger, good news. You happy with this result?
Oh, I'm like Linda. I didn't expect anything else. I mean, it's fundamentally essential for a decent society to be able to feed your children, is it not? I mean, who on earth would contemplate not wanting to see the children of your own society being able to eat a decent meal?
Absolutely.
So to me, it was fundamental, and to me, it was never in any doubt.
Well, that is good news to end on then. I'd like to thank both Roger Mullen and Linda Fabiani very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to speak to both of you. And we'd like to thank you at home for joining us as well. It's more important that we speak to you than we speak to any of our guests. We would ask if you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland. If you can do that, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month makes a big, big difference to what we're able to do here at Broadcasting Scotland. First of all, it helps us keep the lights on. We do have bills to pay here, and obviously funding is stretched at all times. So if you are able to help us, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, sign up there. If you're not able to support us financially, again, we do understand how tight a lot of people's incomes are just now. But you can still help us. You can follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, or you can find us on Facebook. Just search Broadcasting Scotland. Then share the shows around. If you can recruit one person who can contribute a few quid to us, then you've done just as much as if you'd contributed it yourself. We always want to build our audiences and build our donor base, so you can really help with that. You're our marketing team, so please do let people know all about Broadcasting Scotland. And finally, if you want to get involved here at Broadcasting Scotland, we have lots of opportunities, lots of work to be done, whether that's in journalism, whether it's in hosting shows the way that Gordon and I do, or whether it's working behind the camera in the control room, operating a camera, whatever that is. There's lots of opportunities here, whether you have experience or not. We can train you, or we're happy to just make use of your skills if you already have some skills to offer. So if there's anything you'd like to do in the television industry, anything where you'd like to learn or get a wee bit of practice, get a bit of experience, or just keep your hand in from maybe if you're maybe a retired journalist or something like that, then please do get in touch with us. We would love to have you. A few more heads here would make all the difference to what we're able to achieve, which is, of course, to build a better independent broadcaster for Scotland. But that is all we've got time for tonight. I'll be back again tomorrow I'm not just sure who the guests will be yet, but we will find out soon. For now, I'd just like to thank once again Roger Mullen and Linda Fabiani, MSP. It's always a pleasure to have both of them. And thank you again. We will see you tomorrow night, but until then, have a great evening. Good night.